Good morning to you all. Let's give the second day of Istanbul Fintech Week 2020 a start. Today, we will be digging deeper with blockchain and distributed technologies. Cryptocurrencies will also be discussed by experts from around the world. The first session is called Creating a Distributed Universe. This regional panel features Bora Erdamar from Blockchainist and Bahçeşehir University as the moderator, and Emin from our labs and Steve Kokinos from Algorand as speakers.
Hi to everyone. So this is the panel where we discuss about the potential of this distributed universe of blockchain technology. So in this panel, we have two very important panelists. On one side, we have Professor Emin from Cornell University, who is the CEO and founder of Avalanche platform. And on the other side, we have Steve Kokinos, who is the CEO of Algorand platform. And myself, I'm the director of Blockchainist Center and also an assistant professor of economics. So in this panel, we will mainly discuss about the overview of this technology, and then we will focus on the potential and promises of these two very important projects, Avalanche and Algorand. So, with your permission, Steve, I would like to start with Professor Emin Günserer. Could you please briefly describe us about the potential of this technology and about the status of this technology? Will it have an immense impact, do you think? Is it going on the road of the promises, or will it be a limited impact, do you think?
Thank you, Bora. So let's see, the blockchain technologies have enormous potential to change the way we conduct business and the way we structure finance. It is nothing short of a giant revolutionary step for the way we build financial products and the way we reach financial products. Up until recently, the way anybody accessed the financial universe was through intermediaries. So for most of the audience listening to this in Turkey, for example, the way they accessed equities was through the equities market in Turkey. And it was very difficult, for example, to purchase equities outside of the United States, and vice versa. For Americans to invest in Turkish companies is very, very difficult. In order to buy into that market, you have to go through one of the vertically integrated, stovepiped, designated bespoke markets. This is not just true for equities. This is true for just about everything. I live in the United States, and here at some point in my life, I tried to buy Russian sovereign bonds. When Putin was trying to finance some operations, I thought, well, this is a good personal investment opportunity. And from the United States, I could not buy these financial products. They're not very complicated. They're being issued by a legitimate country. I'm in another legitimate country. You just cannot purchase into them. The reach of financial products is incredibly limited, and it almost always involves gatekeepers. And these gatekeepers bring very little value add, and despite that, they extract an enormous tax. So that is going to go away, and that going away is going to completely change the way we access financial products. At the same time, there is an enormous problem with transparency just around the world in just about every country, every society. There are problems of auditability. There are problems of lack of trust. There are people who collect money for various different purposes, and yet there is no way to trust that the money collected will actually go towards those purposes. Smart contracts are poised to completely change this. In short, what I believe is we're heading for an extinction level event for many incumbents. Many of these financial institutions that you see in the West that have grown fat because of where they sit are going to find themselves being challenged by smaller, agile startups building new products. And as I said, it's going to completely change the incumbents. It's going to provide a lot of new opportunities for small startups to come in and innovate in this exciting space.
Thank you, Emin. Steve, would you like to comment on the same question?
Sure. Well, I agree for sure with Emin's comments. I think from my perspective, if you take a step back and maybe look at what the world was like 20 years ago, I think it would have been difficult to imagine when people were using dial-up modems to access the internet that, you could be sitting in the back of the car watching Netflix or videos on your phone while you drive around. And I think that's been a very big shift in the way the world consumes media and shops and communicates, even as evidenced by the call that we're on right now. And so I think really where we are is at the beginning of a pretty broad movement to reshape the world's financial systems. And I think that's needed not just because for one particular reason, but if you look, we have a much more global world. Commerce is global. People need to be able to transact with each other. And that's very difficult in a lot of ways. And then separately, for sure, there are millions, if not billions of people in the world that just don't have access to the same modern financial tools that we enjoy in places like America or broadly Western nations. And so I think bringing financial inclusion by way of new financial products and peer-to-peer transactions to many more people is really important. But then separately, just by nature of the fact that so much of economic activity happens globally today, we really need to think about how decentralized systems can bring tools to counterparties in those transactions that really have no legal or financial remedy if something goes wrong. And I think that's where there's really a big opportunity as well. So I think by all accounts, we're at the beginning of a much broader movement that will include central bank digital currencies, will include new novel forms of financial products like we're seeing in DeFi that simply couldn't exist in a traditional world. And we're going to see, I think, traditional financial institutions and payment companies, get more involved in the markets as well. So I think it'll be really exciting to see how it shapes up. But I think at the same time, we need technologies that enable, the scale of the world to start to deploy on decentralized systems. And I think until, recently that hasn't really existed. So I think we're at the start line, not the finish line. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how the world evolves over the next years.
Thank you, Steve. Well, in the next question, I would like to focus on the projects. So, Emin, could you briefly describe us the status of the Avalanche project right now? In the maybe informal way to ask this, how is Avalanche going?
It's going really well, thank you. Avalanche launched its mainnet finally about 3.5 weeks ago. And we are thrilled about the support that we received from the general global Avalanche community. We ended up reaching an enormous set of people in our public sale, and that was a sale that ended up involving more than 100 countries, lots and lots of diversity around the globe. I am really proud of the network that has emerged. It's a truly decentralized network with hundreds of participants in the upkeep of the ledger itself, and many more than that in terms of delegators who are delegating to validators. With that said, what I'm even more excited about is the activity that's happening on top of this new foundation that we've created. There are lots of interesting projects coming online even as we speak. There are stable coins coming on top of Avalanche. There are smart contracts being deployed that take advantage of the stable coins. And there are lots of big projects looking to move from Ethereum, where transaction fees are rather high, to Avalanche, where they're much lower and the throughputs are much, much higher. So, and the scalability of the system is much better. So I'm really excited about the activity. I'm really excited about what people see. And I'm really excited about the retention that we're getting. People who touch this new technology are immediately won over by the quick finality. So we're achieving finalities that can only be dreamed of by other projects. We're getting finalization in under a second for transactions. And we're doing this without compromising decentralization. So I'm really thrilled about where we are. There is much more to come. So as I think I said in an earlier meeting with you, there is a lot of things that we had in the pipeline. The platform was just the very first step. So we took that first step, and there are many more coming, and I'm super excited about what is to come this fall and this winter.
Thank you, Emin, and we wish you the best of luck. Dear Steve, same question. Could you please briefly describe the current status of Algorand project and how is it going?
Sure. Well, I think we're really excited about the progress we've made. For people that aren't that familiar with us, Algorand was based on work done by Silvio Micali, who's one of the formative cryptographers out there. And we launched about 18 months ago, and I think one of our goals has been to both launch the protocol, but also use learnings by what the market sort of suggested and community suggested that they would be interested in, to then continuously add to the platform. So if you look at some of the things we've added, Algorand standard assets, the ability to create fungible and non-fungible tokens in layer 1 is something that was rolled out in November of last year, along with atomic transfers, the ability to exchange assets both one-on-one or multi-asset, multi-party in a single transaction, along with both stateless and stateful layer 1 smart contracts. So in Algorand, everything we do runs at the full speed of the chain and doesn't have any performance penalty for doing that. And in terms of launches, we've been really excited by the traction and adoption partners are seeing and generating on the platform. Over the course of 2020, partners have added about 6 million addresses in terms of users on their underlying applications. We've had over 200 fungible tokens created on the mainnet, and running about 500,000 transactions a day or so against those transactions. And so I think when we kind of look across the activity that's being generated and the amount of new users that we're seeing brought on, I think we feel really good that we're addressing one of the key goals, which is bringing new users into crypto and not necessarily being as focused on some of the ones that have been there, because we think that mainstream adoption is going to need to come from new people entering and using different types of applications. And I think in terms of assets deployed, we're one of I think only another chain or two that has both USDC and USDT live on the platform. And we're starting to see more DeFi and other interesting applications show up. So overall, we've been really encouraged by what we're seeing, and definitely there'll be more to come from us.
Thank you, Steve. For the next question, I would like to briefly describe the ecosystem in nowadays. So to my humble opinion, I see 3 different waves. I mean, from some perspective, these waves can be even kind of contradictory with each other. Specifically in one end, we have the rise of the central bank digital currencies, which are by definition actually central projects. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the DeFi movement, especially this summer, 2020 summer is also called as DeFi summer, which is by definition supposed to be decentralized. And on the middle ground, we have the rise of the digital payment solutions. I mean, it has started with Facebook Libra, maybe. And then just yesterday, we heard that PayPal is now integrating some cryptocurrency solutions for the digital payments. And in terms of your projects, do you have any priority among these 3 waves? Or in general, do you think that they can survive altogether, or one of them will be leading? So what are your opinions and roadmaps there, dear Emin?
Sure. So I don't really see this as 3 separate trends, actually. What I see is one giant trend up and to the right of adoption. What you're seeing is there's a core fundamental functionality that we're all excited about, and now slowly the rest of the world is catching up. So central bankers are now realizing the benefits of digital currencies. They have yet to scratch the surface there. And they're essentially just dipping their toe in the water. The Bank of England is just essentially taking some basic steps. You're seeing the Fed take a lot of exciting steps actually behind the covers. So we're going to see some really big movements in the years to come, in the year and a half to come ahead of us. So I'm really excited about what's happening there of central bank currencies, making a lot of headway. All of these systems deep down need to be decentralized. And they also need to be built on top of platforms that provide the necessary flexibility. So if you're a central banker, you need to be able to control the entirety of the lifetime of your coin. You need to be able to have full control over the network. You need to be able to have full control even when things go wrong. And if you look at the systems out there, there are very few that give you control over what we call the life cycle of digital assets. Now, what does that require? It requires that you be able to define the behavior of your asset. And that's generally not so impossible if you support, like we do, if you support something like the Ethereum virtual machine, if you support a Turing complete programming platform, then you can define behaviors that you like. That's possible. But you also need to be able to control what happens inside the network once the assets have been launched. And on that front, Avalanche differs tremendously from every other chain out there in that it gives you control over participation in the network, over network members, which in turn gives you control when unexpected things happen. And unexpected things happen with regularity in the blockchain space. About every year or every 2 years or so, there is a big blow up when something goes wrong and there has to be a remedy. So central bank digital currencies is a topic I'm really excited about. And I see it coming. We all see it coming. And we have the right infrastructure on Avalanche. At the same time, and as you mentioned, on the other end of the spectrum, we have the DeFi explosion. That's also really exciting. It's a bit inward oriented. And at the moment, if you ask me, it has run its course. That is to say, the fees are so high that participation in DeFi is actually very difficult. And the usage, the knowledge required to participate in DeFi is so complicated that, you know, the audience that's watching this, they get it. I'm sure they're tech savvy enough to be able to navigate that complicated space. The young programmers who are watching us, it's not a problem for us, but it's nowhere near mass adoption. So DeFi has essentially been really exciting for a while. Everybody who could get into it already experimented with it, ran into a problem when it got popular, and now everybody's looking around for the next big step. And that next big step involves, I think, in my opinion, a big jump in scalability. It needs a new platform that truly scales. It needs much lower fees to make it accessible. And it needs a lot more creativity, a lot more flexibility from the underlying platform. So we're really excited because Avalanche offers all of those things. We've always been a huge supporter of innovative projects in the DeFi space. So that's where I think that's where I see us going as a space. Really, really exciting. We are not picking any one application area for Avalanche. Avalanche is a general purpose platform. It supports everything from gaming to DeFi applications to traditional finance applications. So all of that is in scope for us. And I don't know which one is going to win. I typically don't take sides in this. I hope they all win. There's no reason why they all should not succeed. And so that's where we're going with Avalanche.
Thanks a lot, Emin. So Steve, just to remind the question again, so among these, as I described it, 3 separate waves of CBDCs, fintech companies, solutions, and DeFi movement, what is Algorand promising to us?
Well, I think, you know, what's sort of struck me about sort of the DeFi movement is that one, it's very early, but it's creating financial products and ways of thinking about finance that just aren't possible in a traditional world. And so I think when you look at some of the ideas around governance and governance tokens, I think that's very exciting and I think shows a lot of promise over the long term. At the same time, I think it's just sort of factual that the more traditional financial players, big banks and payment networks largely control all the world's money. And so I think they have to be a participant here if we're going to really get to the mainstream. And the same is true of central banks. And so I think that what's struck us is that there are some common elements of a platform that kind of anybody across that world needs. And so I think if you look at a lot of the layer 1 primitives that we've put into the protocol at Algorand, I think largely there's a lot of overlap, whether you're creating a DeFi application or a more traditional, maybe something based on the common domain model. And if you're a bank. Now, at the same time, there's also differences in what people need. So if you look at DeFi applications by nature, they're very decentralized. They tend to focus on kind of peer-to-peer elements that we are really excited about, at Algorand, and I think in general around a decentralized economy. I think when you start to look at more traditional financial players, they have real regulatory requirements around privacy, around keeping personal data and customer data under, to themselves, and, also making sure that they can report on what's going on. And so that may mean, if you look at Algorand, we have the idea of co-chains, which is people being able to deploy their own networks, but still connect to the public mainnet. And so I think that there are slightly different uses of the technology, including central banks. And I think what we found there is, while traditional financial institutions have regulatory requirements, central banks actually have a desire to be more transparent than they have been in the past, and want to be able to interact with more counterparties than just the banks in their country. And so I think each of those constituents have slightly different needs, but can all take advantage of some of the underlying fundamentals that are needed. And the way we look at it is that, for sure, as this drives to the mainstream, there'll become a new normal that probably blends elements from each of these communities into kind of a new financial system. And I think for us, we're also not necessarily sure kind of which form that takes or what new applications look like. We want to make sure that as many as possible build on top of the Algorand blockchain and help, by virtue of the fact that there's a thriving community, encourage others to do the same.
Thank you, Steve. Well, like the final question, let's say, and I would like to move on to the vision side, especially in terms of the future. I see that actually we all see that there are some challenges for the development of this technology and adoption by the countries, by the humanity in general. So I would like to mention two of those challenges. One of them is, as we all see and say, the regulations. The regulations are not there. So let's say the first category is the bureaucratic issues. The second one is probably more inner-oriented problem, which is about cooperation. I mean, this technology is about being decentralized and is about being cooperation. But in many projects, we see that there is also a huge competition. So in that sense, would you like to comment on those challenges? Which one is bigger, do you think? And what is your vision about the near future, Emin?
Let's see. So the regulatory challenges are immense for first generation blockchains. Just about everybody, for the first 10 years of this revolution, essentially what they did was copy Bitcoin. And what they built were coins, a single coin with a single network and a single set of rules. And those rules, say the Bitcoin rules, for example, fit nobody perfectly. Bitcoin enforces its own rules. It has the Bitcoin universe. It's an extra legal universe. It does not exist within any legal jurisdiction. It is not integrated with any financial system. It's its own system. And for the first 10 years, the challenges lay in integrating the Bitcoin universe with the regular traditional finance universe. And now, what I think you're seeing in the last year, I would say, year and a half, is a set of new coins with Avalanche at the lead and Polkadot and Cosmos following closely behind, with a different narrative, where the underlying platform supports multiple different networks with their own different rules. So that kind of an architecture allows one to actually build sub-networks that play well with regulatory requirements. You could create, for example, a US subnetwork or a GDPR compliant subnetwork on Avalanche, or a China compliant subnetwork on Avalanche, and issue assets on there that are subject to those jurisdictional requirements. I'm super glad to hear that Algorand has also added support for this vision with their co-chains. And so it was a very compelling vision when we first ended up talking about it while we were in our formative stages of building the Avalanche system. So I think this is a great big enabler. Every time I talk to a large company, every time I talk to a sovereign that wants to issue centrally backed digital currencies, what I hear from them loud and clear is control over their asset and compliance with local jurisdictional rules. If you don't have a legal foundation, you've got nothing. You cannot go after businesses if your narrative does not have a legal aspect to it. So So that's why you're seeing a lot of new coins, a lot of actually old coins also adding support for this vision that we pioneered into their systems. So that's really critical. And I'm really glad to be at the forefront of this. There's a lot more to be done in that space. What was the second portion of your question? You were asking about what was the second part?
Among the challenges, which one is more important and critical, competition or the lack of regulations?
Oh, competition. I'm not the least bit worried about competition. I think the teams that are present, the teams with vision, the teams with technical innovation will be there. And there will be a small number of them at any one time. And so I know that we're not going anywhere whatsoever. We're going to be here and innovating and showing the world how to use blockchains. I don't believe in a one chain wins all universe. There will be many of these blockchains. Some will get very specialized for certain use cases, and they will learn to coexist with each other. So competition is not my concern at all. We always keep our eyes outside the crypto sphere, and we always try to bring in new assets and new communities into the Avalanche universe. So we have a lot of exciting things planned on this front. Lots of new digital assets to be issued. We already have hundreds of coins that people have already issued on top. And so I'm really excited. Competition is not my issue. That's sort of an old school style of thinking. In the first 10 years of this, you got these maximalists. And if you go back and read the kind of stuff they say, it looks absurd, right? You had IOTA maximalists for the longest time saying all sorts of things. I mean, just look at the kinds of things they say and then look at what happened later on. This is going to be a very fun universe. There will be multiple winners. And the coins that come ahead will be the ones with hardcore technology, a real big team that's behind it, that's actually driving forth the vision, actual people moving the space forward, not engaged in internal fighting. And people who are coming up with new ideas will forever be ahead of those that are copycats, that are taking in ideas from others.
Thank you, Emin. Steve, just with a kind of extra comment. So I have just focused on these two challenges, the competition or the lack of regulations. I mean, your opinions for those, or if you see an additional third challenge, of course, the stage is yours.
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, there's a couple of different things. First, there's no example of any pervasive tech wave, whether it was the internet or communications or mobile, that ended up with one single technology being the only thing in a space. So I just think it's unrealistic to expect that that would be the case here. I think what we've seen in other examples are tech stacks emerging. And I agree with Emin that for sure, we're going to have multiple chains that people rely on for different purposes. And I think that the sooner that people, start to think seriously about that, the better it's going to be. One of the things that we've prioritized for sure is interoperability, both in terms of being able to bridge assets, to and from Algorand, but the other is being able to, have people write smart contracts in simpler ways. We recently partnered with Blockstack around their Clarity language. We think that having very simple languages for developers is really, really important. I also think from a developer standpoint, if you use that as a proxy for mainstream adoption, there's maybe 100,000 people that build or using blockchain technology today, but there's 20 million developers that build for web and mobile. And I think one of the things that really has to happen is as we start to see more developers get interested and look to build blockchain applications, having them not need to relearn new languages and have a minimum of education required is going to be increasingly important. So if you look at Algorand, one of the things we recently launched was PyTeal, which is a way to enable people to write our Layer 1 smart contracts, but using Python. If you look out in the community, Reach has developed a compiler that allows people to use JavaScript to write Layer 1 smart contracts. And so I think what we see is more and more of that is going to be necessary, because as those longer tail of developers come and the applications and the users follow them, we need to make it as easy as possible for them to come in. So I think it's less about competition with kind of existing projects and more thinking about how what are people using different platforms for? How do we encourage new developers to come in and by proxy those applications to ultimately start to take shape and onboard millions, 100 millions, billions of users like we saw over the internet and the mobile waves that have happened more recently. And I think that applies to central bank digital currencies as well. I think one of the things that, and I'd say it applies to assets of any form, which is regulations exist for a reason, which is to make sure that people are protected and that there's functioning markets in whatever jurisdiction they happen to be. And I think it's absolutely the case whether you're launching a national currency or whether you're launching you're issuing a bond or some other security, that those regulations are followed. And I think any platform that somebody's going to use to deploy an asset should be able to handle all of those requirements. I think if you look at Algorand as an example, our ASA framework, a standard asset framework, enables fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens, securities, and even the ideas of sort of clawback and freezing accounts and black and white lists. These are all things that I think as we start to see different forms of assets enter the mainstream and start to be issued on decentralized platforms, that have to be accounted for. And so I think what we're really doing is laying the plumbing or laying the foundation, one, to enable people to deploy whatever form of asset they need. But then secondly, also thinking about how we make the developer experiences really simple so that, as more and more people look to develop, we can minimize the amount of time they have to spend understanding what goes on under the hood in terms of, the blockchain platforms themselves. So I think it's for sure, agree, going to be a handful of blockchains that sort of form the new infrastructure of the decentralized world. It's not going to be one, and we're happy to interoperate with anybody out there because we think that that's the right way forward and will be the best way to encourage more participation in these networks.
Many thanks, Steve. Well, I think it was a very fruitful panel, and I would like to thank you both for your discussions, for your contributions, not only for this panel, but for your contributions to the blockchain ecosystem as a whole. I mean, this technology will rise on the giant of the giants, on the shoulder of the giants, sorry. And for our audience, I mean, today, I mean, there will be very fruitful panels afterwards of this panel. So I would like to thank you all and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bora, and thank you everyone for tuning in.